I just realized I've been saying Iran for most of this video, and honestly that's a product of how I was brought up. That's how I always heard it, and only recently did I hear that no, it's Iran, so I apologize. Patreon sponsored video time again, and I am a month late, but that's okay, time is irrelevant in quarantine times. This time I'm talking about Persepolis, or Persepolis, I can never remember how to pronounce it, a topic requested by Jacob Bilo once again. So this is an animated movie that is based on a person's life who lived through the Iranian Revolution and then lived through the aftermath of it. And also there is a really good comic book, graphic novel, however you want to describe it, that I highly recommend. Actually, whenever I think of this movie, I think of it as a piece to the puzzle of the bigger story that Marjane Satrapi is telling, because there are vignettes and stories in here that are not in the book, but then there are a lot more stories and a lot more context than is in the movie here. Of course, in the movie you're pressed for time, but then in the book you've got a lot more space. Like, all that's constricting you are just page counts. Actually, I'm going to partially walk back my description as being about someone who lived through the Iranian Revolution and the aftermath of it, because it's a lot more than that. It's more about personal identity and trying to keep up with who you are and the identity of your family and your culture, the bigger identity of you, and then having to weigh that against the identity that the world is trying to build for you and what's most comfortable for you to exist in that world as. For me, one of my favorite aspects of this movie and the graphic novels is seeing at once a woman who is trying to figure out how to be Western, how to be modern after coming from such a society fraught with turmoil, and that eventually decides to go for religious fundamentalism and regression, and then trying to figure out then how to fit back into that society while also having experienced freedom, having experiences that she had in Vienna and Europe, and then also at heart again being the woman who her parents raised, being the person who spoke up against the lies being told to her at school, speaking up against how ridiculous a lot of her country, things that they were saying and the things that the people around her wanted her to believe. Trying to find a place amongst people who just accept that this is the way things are now. You just have to wear the veil. You just have to exist because the people, the men on top, say this is how it is. And then trying to coexist with people who see war and existing through it as cool, as a status marker, rather than the horrible thing that no one should ever go through that it is. And then also being among people who think protests and revolutions are cool. Basically, being the person who Marjane was at the start of the movie when she was a little girl during the Iranian Revolution, just full of idealist ideas, thinking that, oh, you just have to raise your voice, then everything will get better, and not recognizing that if you don't do it exactly right, it could go horribly wrong. Something else I really appreciate about this movie and the book is that, for me at least, as someone who grew up in the US, where Iran is just some backwater country that, you know, oppresses women and hates America, I like seeing a different side of Iran. Seeing the people who live there, the people who just are trying to eke out a living. Yeah, there's still the inherent sexism of the society, but that doesn't mean everyone there is a monster. I mean, is everyone in North Korea like Kim Jong-un? And not only that, but I like that this piece of work allows me to see into the lives of someone very different than me. I mean, I didn't personally live through war. I've lived through a couple wars that the country I live in have participated in, but I've never really had war come to my own soil. The closest I've ever lived through was 9/11, and hell, even for that, I was only 6 years old. It's not exactly the same as seeing your city constantly bombed and your neighbor's building just destroyed overnight. I also like how Persepolis also points out how irrelevant family histories can easily become. if you don't keep it in the back of your mind and think about it every so often, then the things that your forefathers went through, the things that built you into your current position, they easily are forgotten. And then going through how the shame of having forgotten that can become overwhelming and pile on to whatever problems are currently going on right now. It's not to say that your problems now are lesser than the ones that your parents, your family members have gone through before. I mean, they're affecting you still the same. But sometimes I think, especially in Marjan's case, it can really help to put into perspective what you're experiencing and basically what it means to you, or what it ought to mean to you in the grand scheme of things. Sometimes it helps to think, I and my family didn't survive a revolution just for me to die in the streets over a boy. Not saying it's the best solution for everyone, but, you know, it helps some people. During the scenes where the Iranian Revolution was going on, I really liked the dichotomy of how Marjan, this 4-year-old girl experiencing such a momentous time in her country's history, sees it as not really a game, but like something cool, fascinating, something exciting, something to be a part of, like a grand adventure you see in novels, like being filled up with the stories of her uncle's time during the previous revolution, and all these idealistic thoughts of how great it's going to be once the Shah is taken down, but then seeing her parents at the same time recognizing our friends are dead. This is getting really scary. It's not just going out and protesting anymore, like shit's hitting the fan. Her parents seeing the way things are going, where the winds are blowing, but then Marjan not being capable of understanding things past then that she lives in interesting times. That change is coming. But she can't see what kind because she just doesn't have the experience or the context that her parents do. I also liked how this movie and then the books take the time to explore a little bit of what it's like growing up in a bloody, dirty revolution and then growing up in a war. Seeing the things that kids take, but not as heavily as the adults would, they sort of turn it into messed up games because that's how they're processing it. They hear the adults talk about torture, the things that political prisoners were experiencing, and the kids process it as something to incorporate into their games because what else are they gonna do? It's not like, oh, they're kids, they can't understand, but more that they haven't fully been exposed to what the adults are talking about. They just know that this is a thing that's happening, but can't fully process the gravity or extent or the darkness that someone would who has any sort of context would be able to get from that. They just sort of internalize the extremes that they hear, not really understanding why people believe in it or the merits of it. Marjan and her friends were raised by people who support taking down the Shah, so of course they're gonna see anyone who's affiliated with supporting the Shah as being bad. They feel like they're right for punishing that kid whose father was helping execute people against the Shah. I mean, they're the good guys, right? That's what they're supposed to do. Good guys punish people who are bad. And then I also really like the small scene where Marjan's parents weigh leaving Iran, going somewhere else because they know that shit's really bad here and they're gonna just get worse. So if they were gonna leave, then it'd have to be at this point in time. But then having to talk about, well, wherever we go, we're giving up our livelihoods. We're giving up what we have built in this country. Their careers, whatever money they have, they're going to lose when they flee to another country. It's highly unlikely that Marjan's father, who's an engineer, will be able to do the same in the US. When Marjan's mom was considering fleeing like some of their friends had, Marjan's dad says something to the effect of, why? So then you could become someone's maid and I could become a taxi driver? It's a part of asylum seeking and being a refugee that no one thinks of, especially no one in the US, because we're not used to doing such things. We're not used to things being that bad for us to feel like we have to flee our country. So we don't consider what goes into fleeing your home. You're not just leaving your house, this immovable building of yours. You're not just leaving the town you grew up in. You're leaving your friends, You're leaving your careers, your base of operations, your everything that established who you were. You're leaving a life that you know how to live through. All that you've ever known for something that you can only try to imagine. You don't know if the place you go next will accept your credentials or think that you're worthy of continuing in a position similar to the one that you had in your hometown. Hell, you're going somewhere that you don't even know if there'll be space enough for you. You're just leaving everything behind with the hope that wherever you end up will be better than where you are now. There is so much in this movie and in the books that I think people really should experience at some point. Not saying like, oh, experience war, but more experience these pieces of media. Even if you don't care about Iranian history or anything, experience it to put yourself in the shoes of someone unlike yourself. Especially if you're like me, who grew up in the US and didn't know it freaking snows in Iran. I think we all need to consume media like this that takes us outside of our comfort zones, makes us live in someone else's shoes, even for an hour and a half. See what it means to try to be free in a country, in a regime that would rather you not. And then at least get a glimpse of what it's like to have experienced things like war and revolution, and then be surrounded by people who don't appreciate what goes into such things and still say that we should have it. Or at the very least, see what it's like to be a girl just trying to grow up in such strange and tumultuous times. Because even here in the US, where a lot of shit's going bad, it's not as bad as it could be. That's not saying that, oh, we've got it great, but we also don't have it as terrible as other places. And I think it's important to remember those places as well. To view ourselves through the lens of being a citizen of the world rather than a citizen of the country, the city, the town you live in. As the poem goes, no man is an island. And for me at least, I think it enriches me to experience media like Persepolis, to understand my fellow man. I certainly feel more whole the more I learn about people who are unlike me, people who haven't been through what I've been through. Not just, oh, I want to respect their perspectives because everyone's perspective is equally correct, but understanding that if I only see the world through my eyes, then I don't see the world. I just see whatever's right in front of my nose. Thank you very much, Jacob Elo, for sponsoring this video. I've been wanting to talk about Persepolis for a very long time. It is one of my favorite graphic novels. I don't know about my favorite animated movie. That has a lot more competition for that, but definitely one of my favorite autobiographies. Thank you very much for consuming this video, and until next time.